Before we begin this episode, we'd like to acknowledge that the Abbies Rugby Club declined to comment on this episode, and President Keith Ford of the Charlottetown Minor Hockey Association, when asked about the word Abbies, said, "I just didn't quite know it was derived from the word Abaguit." Thank you for tuning in. That was the sound of 76,400 Kansas City Chiefs fans before their kickoff with the Jacksonville Jaguars in the AFC divisional round of this year's playoffs. They're performing the Tomahawk Chop, or the Chop, as it's known amongst fans. And the Chop began in the 1980s with the Florida State Marching Chiefs. They performed the Chop pre-game before their marching song, the War Song. Throughout North America and England, many professional sports teams perform the Chop, from the Atlanta Braves in the Major League Baseball to the Exeter Chiefs of Premiership Rugby, who actually stopped performing the Chop before this season due to concerns of cultural insensitivity. And I think that's the right way to go. Because here's the thing, I love the Chop, and I hate to say it, but every time I hear the Tomahawk Chop, I'm back to being 8 years old again with my father at the Kansas City Chiefs games. There in section 114 and row 5, where my family has sat for over 25 years. I love the Tomahawk Chop, and I hate that I love it, because it draws from Indigenous culture. And while Indigenous society never performed the Tomahawk Chop, it's performed by Caucasian fans of NFL teams, MLB teams, and minor league teams across this globe. And that's often the problem. The teams that drive their culture from Indigenous society often overlook the atrocities committed throughout European colonization of North America. Rather, they look towards their team's history. We saw it when the Washington Redskins changed their name to the Commanders. We saw it when the Cleveland Indians changed their name to the Guardians. There's hesitation. But the problem is Indigenous culture never performed the Chop. It didn't begin 10,000 years ago. It didn't begin 5,000 years ago. It began 40 years ago with a college marching band. History is a double-edged sword. We learn great things about the history and culture of the things we love. On the flip side, we learn terrible things about the history and the culture of the things we love. But we can't pick and choose what we want to hear. What we need to hear is what has happened and what we can do better. This is not your typical episode of the Waterboyz. It's a reason and a place where we can look at the past and what has happened here on this island and what we can do going forward. You may be familiar with the name Abbies. The Abbies began as an athletic club in the 1880s and a rugby club there shortly before then. Abbies comes from the word Abaguit, the Indigenous word for this here land we call home. Today we know the Abbey as an old ferry that used to cross the water and connect this island to the mainland. And the old Abbey horn is actually bolted to the ceiling of the Eastlink Center where the Islanders play. The Abbies moniker is also used by a local hockey team and a local rugby team. What's important, once more, is that we know our history. And that is why this episode. I hope you enjoy, folks. I'm Grant Harrison. This is the Waterboyz, a look into the past and the history of racism in sport on this island. So we're back. We're here at Abaguit First Nation And I'm joined with Chief Roger Gould.
Hello.
How are we?
I'm good. I'd like to introduce myself. Chief Roddy Gould Jr. of the Abbies First Nation in Prince Edward Island, P.E.I. Nindelawisi Southport Mohawks. That's how I'm introduced in my Mi'kmaq language. It says, my name is Chief Roddy Gould Jr. Nice to be here.
And Kwe, correct?
Hello, general salutation. Yeah.
There we go.
Good on.
So, we're talking about racism in sport. More specifically, names and the changing thereof. And when looking at history, it's important to both correct it and look back to make sure you're correcting the right things. So, when you look at names on the island, such as the Southport Mohawks, Savage Harbour, which is a stone's throw away from here, and the Abbies, which is a hyphenated and Anglo-Saxon pronunciation of Abbies, what comes to your mind?
Concern. Redmond was another one. I think it was a rural Redmond.
Yeah.
They changed the name back in the day. Concern that is offensive to any one person or a segment of society. And if a segment of society is offended by something, it's good to have the conversation like you're having now. Engage in the conversation, understand why that segment of society feels that they're being treated differently or less than a productive part of society. And I think that's the question. If there's a terminology, it's in the English dictionary and it's offensive, it's taken out. As long as somebody agrees that it is offending or upsetting somebody which they respect as a part of society, they'll honor them. That's the problem. I feel that a lot of First Nations people, like here in Prince Edward Island, where my mother or my father are offended by the terminology of, say, Savage Harbour, or a sports team where they're and that's offensive to them. That hurts their feelings. They should be given the same respect as everybody else in society, that it is credible. And then they should have the conversation, well, how can we change that behavior? And you correct your behavior. So I think that in Prince Edward Island, we've done a lot collectively to address those issues. We're far from being perfect by any means, but we're lucky enough that we're in a small area where we can have the conversation, have good conversations, where if your neighbor's offended by the sign you have in your yard, if there's any respect or any camaraderie between two neighbors, they'll usually change the sign or take the sign down. So I think it's a common conversation that starts the process, and I think it's a mutual understanding of respect between two people. And it's to me, it's about when you talk about First Nations, whether it be a national sports team or a terminology, it has to be a respected part of society. If we've always been continuously being seen as not a part of society, we won't have the same respect. So it's about respect.
Yeah. And when we talk about respect, you recently built a rink here. Yeah. And what was the motivation behind that rink that you're building?
The motivation, honestly, is to get kids out of the house. It's an outdoor rink in which people can go to and be have the life skill and learn the involvement and how important sport is to developing character and being a productive part of society. I think you can have an outdoor rink and you can encourage kids and people to take part in sport, but if they don't take the initiative and get engaged, then they're going to miss out. They'll miss out on so much that sports can teach us, and it has taught me so much my entire life that I was able to apply those situations and those leadership skills and development to be lucky enough to be elected as a leader of the First Nation, known as Abbies and P.E.I.
Yeah. So, just like you said, young kids playing sport, and sports are such a pivotal part of any culture. So, growing up, what lessons did you learn playing sport?
There's a lot of good lessons and a lot of hard lessons. One of the big things that I've done here in the Abbies First Nation, from my own experience, you can't create a welfare state. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. You can't create a welfare state and expect people to thrive. So what you want to do is give them the opportunity. So what I've done from growing up is I've said, I'm not just going to pay for kids' hockey registration. I want the parents to pay for the hockey registration. Then I'll sponsor the parent. So the parent invests in that child, I'll invest in the parent. The kind of philosophy and ideology is the same thing about teaching someone to fish. If you feed them, they'll eat once, but if they learn how to fish, they'll feed themselves forever. And that's the philosophy that I have. In sports is the same thing. It's a motivational encouragement to get people engaged, be a productive part, structure, and all the things that come with it. When you're First Nation, you have a hurdle to overcome them because you're already judged, you're not an acceptable part of society, and you're belittled. So that's right there. That's always there for us.
After you've played your youth sports, you had an opportunity to join the Pittsburgh Pirates
Well,
well,
yeah,
double A or
right.
triple A affiliate.
So one of the things back when I was younger was that they went around and scouted, and I think they scouted a lot of First Nations, but I was scouted, and I went to Orono, Maine, where I took part in their Pittsburgh Pirates Scout Camp. It's one of the things that I'm proud of. I was lucky enough to get to go there and have the opportunity, and another thing too, when you look at it, and if you're from the States, when I went there, it was at the time I had the uniform Montreal Expos, and everybody down there had the pinstripe, the white and black pinstripe one from the Mets or whatever. There was no Canadian teams in the whole camp. There was hundreds of kids, but I was the only one with the Montreal Expos colors. So just being different is always a problem for a lot of people. But as a First Nation person that I was lucky enough to be involved with that, I've learned a lot from it, and it helped me develop where I am and who I am today. I was fortunate enough to go there, and I also was. Anyways, I'm not gonna keep tooting my own horn on that.
So Pittsburgh's one of those cities where they've kind of grouped their professional sports teams with the black and yellow culture, and you see some grouping of names as well. Now,
right.
Being from Kansas City, it's the Kings, who are now the Sacramento Kings in the NBA. Mm-hmm. We've got the Royals, who still play today, the Kansas City Chiefs, who still play today, and the Kansas City Scouts, who have left. So let's talk about the Scouts and the Chiefs and the culture at those games, the tomahawk chop, the banging of the ceremonial drum, and the correction of team names around professional sports. What comes to mind?
Two things come to mind. The one that the easy connection between P.E.I. and us in here was we had a softball team in P.E.I. back in the day, and it was 90% First Nation men in the community, and I coached it. And we played in the largest league in P.E.I. Eastern Canada. The terminology used, like, we're playing the effing Indians tonight, and it was a derogatory reference. It was not in that we're a good team, but it was a derogatory reference. Oh, we're playing the effing Indians. We're going out to the effing reservation. So I was like, well, I got an idea. Let's empower that. So I put on my chest for our new uniforms, Indian, Scotchford Indians, with a big feather dangling across it. So I empowered. I took away from their belittling terminology for us, and I empowered it. I took that back, and I owned it. Scotchford Indians went on to be the best team in P.E.I. for about 8 years in a row. We won the Eastern Canadian Division. We were very well on the map. So no longer were we a derogatory reference to a people. We're the best ball players in P.E.I. So we took that part of it back. But how do you do it at the national level, and how do you do it in other things like that? You have to put things in context. If they're up there going, whoa, whoa, we're honoring this part of that. I said, well, okay, if that's true, apply it to everything else. What if we changed it and okay, let's take it out. Use the N-word. I said, no, we're not going to do that. You can't do that. Well, no, we're talking about they're strong, they thrive, they came a long way. We're honoring the plight they had, the fight. That's what we're honoring. Why? That's not acceptable. So why is it acceptable to pick and choose when you use a derogatory term for people? Oh, turn a blind eye to that part. Oh no, this is, you know what I mean? It doesn't hold any merit, and this goes to the value of how you respect it, especially in the States, where First Nation people are the very bottom of they're way down there as far as respect, and there's no respect there. So I think that's part of the problem. And then you have a country and a movement which is trying to wake up and say, listen, let's be more respectful, especially in this woke society where sexual preference, sexual identity, pronouns, and all these things are important. They are to people, but isn't how First Nations people feel, isn't that important? It should be. It really should be. Just as important it is he, she, him, them, they. It should be, but it doesn't get that same kind of respect or discussion. That's why when you said you were interested in talking about it, I'm like, well, let's talk.
Looking at the overcorrection now, terms like brave and prehistory, that could be seen as discriminatory. Not every Indigenous man or woman is brave. So why call Indigenous people brave? Or prehistory doesn't include those 10,000 years before European settlers came to this island. So for you, where's the line between respecting your history and not whitewashing it? Or overcorrecting, I should say.
Again, I'm a little confused on the question
Yeah.
because the value is in the question. You know what I mean? If you don't value one person's identity or self-worth, you know what I mean? Is there a quota that you have to reach before it becomes something that will reach value? And that's the problem. Like, if like I said, like I'm okay with it. Like if it's a name, like the Indians, I put it on my chest. You know, I can't change what they're calling us behind our backs. I can't change that terminology that they use to, they feel belittling us, right? But I can take it away from them and put it on my chest. I say, it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't offend me. There's other people in my community that are hurt by it. There are other people that are offended by it. Even to this day now, there's names and terminology in P.E.I. that people are offended by. Personally, I'm not. I got pretty big shoulders, and I grew up when sticks and stones didn't hurt me. But I will speak up for the one or two people that are hurt by it. And I think that's the important. Shouldn't be a value on the question. At what threshold do we become offended? If one person can say, I identify as this, and you respect that, but my people say we don't appreciate being called that and you don't respect that, the value is the difference. How are we belittled? And I'll tell you why we're belittled, because we're not considered an equal, fair partnership in society. We're not. We're a subpar part of society. We've only recently been acknowledged by being human rights, as having human rights within the past 15 years. So when you put things in perspective, you understand where they came from and where we came from as a history. It should give you more value when you hear our voice. When you hear First Nations people saying, I don't want to go to that game and sit in the stands where everybody's going, woo, woo, because it offends me. Or it offends my mother or my father or my grandfather. My grandfather and my father went to residential schools. So when he sees something like that, he's really hurt by it. I respect that enough to fight for it. So it's the value in the question, you know, and that's where I get a little, how do you feel about it? It's irrelevant how I feel about it. It's relevant that I will do something about it because it is hurting someone. Mm-hmm.
So there's many voices to
Absolutely.
this side, obviously. And when we look at inclusion and equal rights and respecting different cultures, that word different is used.
Right.
So for you, between those two, respecting different cultures or equal rights and inclusion, it's black and white. Where's the gray for you?
Exactly. And it should be black and white. You know what I mean? If you're going to respect, you demand respect from me, I'll give it to you. But you give me a little back, right? And I think that's reciprocated. So yeah, absolutely. So as far as there being an easy, there's not. You know what I mean? Like, and what I tell people, like if I use the word Indian, some people get offended by it. It doesn't offend me. You know what I mean? Like I grew up being called this and that and that, and it doesn't offend me. I'm used to it. But there are other people in my community, and I've known this, that won't go out in society. I'm fair-skinned. I'm half, right? I'm mixed breed. I can fit in society easily. A lot of my friends, my aunts, and some of my uncles and that can't. When you know they're First Nation, you'll see them in a crowd. So they're subject to that racism. They're subject to those taunts on the ice. Hey, woo, go home, you da-da-da, right? We're all subject to those kinds of things. That's enough for me. That's enough that, okay, that's not right. You know what I mean? Like when I played softball on P.E.I, I was left off teams because I was from the reserve. There's two reasons for that. One was based on racist practices in P.E.I, and there's also class. I got cut from the team, one of the P.E.I select teams in baseball. I was one of the best ball players on P.E.I, but I was cut. Now there's two reasons. Based on racism, because I was from the res, or class. And I know that because the other dads were doctors and lawyers, and you know the class, the higher echelon of P.E.I, they played on that team and their sons did. My dad was just a old man from the reservation, so I didn't get much support as far as the class thing. So I wrote it off and I give a little bit. So it was based on racism that I wasn't picked, and it was based on class. Speed up 4 years ago in P.E.I. I've been a term for chief 2 years. So pretty echelon class now. I'm okay. My income's good. I'm in a different society now. I speak well, and I still play ball. I wasn't picked up for the men's senior team on P.E.I. It had nothing to do with class. It has nothing to do with my skill. So Nova Scotia called me from my father's ancestry from. They said, "You're not playing Chief Gould?" I said, "No." "Will you play for Team Nova Scotia in Waikagama, where your grandfather and your family from?" I said, "Absolutely." I played for them. Another First Nation leader in Nova Scotia. We played against P.E.I and we beat them. We beat them badly. So when I try to justify, way you're treated and the things that happen in your life, and I'm 50-50. I'm not a victimized, I don't play the victim card very well. I accept responsibility for half of everything that happens. But if I can eliminate the class part of it, and the only thing left is racism. And it's alive and well today, and it still is today. And I've dealt with it since I was a little kid, and we're still dealing with it today, and it's in society.
So let's go back to something you just said. Mixed race and half-breed.
Yeah.
You grew up without a home before we started here, you said that. And now you're the leader of Abbies First Nation.
Yeah.
How did it feel to go from that no home to being the leader of a nation?
It's about identity. It's about where I belong. Like, I have always felt that. So there's two things with that. Like, and I'll elaborate a little bit on the race card. When I lived on the Abbies First Nation, on the reserve, I was no good half-breed. I was beat up. I got beat up, rocks thrown at me. I fought. I had a fight, and it made me who I am today, and I don't begrudge that at all. But when I got on the bus and went to school, where the nuns in the convent, and I was one of the dirty Indian kids. We sang in choirs that didn't sing with the rest of the kids. We sang one song at the Christmas choir, and that's it. We shuffled off to the side. So I grew up with that. I went on to university and education, and I sat in the faculty, and you couldn't tell I was First Nation. So the faculty was talking about how the First Nation people are less than the academic standards of UPEI. And I'm sitting there like, I'm one of those privileged students that are sitting in your lounge, and I can hear you talking. I'm there because I can articulate, I know your language, I'm successful academically. I'm not here because of any other reason. There's some benefits for me being First Nation, I agree, but I'm here on my own merit. So those are the things that incentivize me to do more than just be the victim. Let's do something about it. So identify the problem, now come up with a solution. So you can't just say, oh, poor me. Yeah, I lived a rough life on the res, I lived it hard off. I had the best of worth. But other people have a hard time. They don't get that break. So I don't know what we were talking about, because I ranted a little bit.
Nothing wrong with a rant.
Yeah.
It's your true emotions.
Yeah. So it's 6 one half another than the other, but it's a complicated. So my perspective is good. I have a good perspective, if that makes sense.
It does. So in the next episode of this 3-part series, we'll look at the present. And I see behind you have plans for a new building. And moving into the future, what are your goals?
My goals are about empowerment. This is one of my philosophical views that I teach my children and my grandchildren, and I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to influence the community now. Understand your history. Know where you came from, because that's why you are where you are today. But you're in control of where you're going in the future. So the best way to do that and understand that is that everything that's happened to me in my life, good and bad, brought me to this point in time. Nothing that was done back then will determine what happens in the future. I will determine what happens in the future. Me. Regardless of what happened in the past, regardless of those decisions that brought me to this point, I'm in control of my future. So what I want to do as an individual is I want to give my children, my grandchildren, and my community the tools to do a better job than I did as a father, the tools to do a better job than I did as a chief. That way they'll be in charge of their future and their own destiny. So when you change your perspective from victimization to identifying the solution, explains why you are where you are, center yourself, but understand that you will control your future, not your past.
With all the stories you've told here today and throughout your life, and I don't want to say you sponsor a hockey player, because you just said you never do. You sponsor the parent who sponsors the hockey player.
Right.
What do you tell young athletes? One story, one historical, take this with you.
Oh my goodness, there's not one. There isn't, and there really isn't. I didn't have a stable home. I didn't have a father that drove me to hockey. I walked from here 3 miles down the road where my coach picked me up. He took me to baseball. I went to high school all day long without any lunch money, and I didn't eat. I stayed at 3 o'clock to play basketball till 6, 7 at night, and I hiked home on the side of the road. Nobody taught me how to play baseball. Nobody taught me how to play softball. Each and every time I tried, I played against myself. each and every time. I would go to a hockey game, I would fall down. I learned how to get up really fast, right? And each time I get up quicker and quicker. Scored 2 goals. The next time I played against myself, and then I told myself, you only scored 2 goals. Not good enough. So the next time I went to hockey, I wanted to score 3. I always played against myself because that allowed me to continuously better myself in everything. But you have to put yourself in a situation where you'll be forced to better yourself. I've also trained in MMA, and we did in the training in MMA and boxing. In boxing, when I was training in boxing, we wore the headgear. But when we did MMA, it was like you have to experience getting hit in the face. That way, it won't come to a shock. I thought that was brilliant, and that's how life should be. You should expect to get hit in the face. You should expect to lose. You should expect to get knocked down, but you always have to get back up. You have to be prepared to get slapped in the face and keep moving forward. But you always have to challenge yourself as an individual. And that's sports is the best way to do it. Get involved with sports, identify how to work in society, how to become a part of a team, accept the wins and the losses, and keep things in perspective. And I think if you challenge yourself and force yourself to get involved with sports like that, you'll be a better person all around for it.
Well, thank you. You've given us some great insight on history, and
Make sense?
it does.
Okay.
Yeah. And hopefully you at home, this sparks a conversation in your own home and amongst your friends and family. That's all we can really hope for here, would you say?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. I think what you're doing is bringing a voice to an issue, and I think it's better to engage in a conversation than it is to talk separately about it. Like when you come to a First Nation and you address someone like myself as a chief who has living experience, and you've empowered that by engaging in this conversation, I really appreciate that. And